Well, hi, and Merry Christmas. Colin here. A week left until Christmas or so, at least at the time of taping this, and I figured it was a pretty good time to check in and say thank you for all the support in 2021. What an interesting year. I got to do something that I wasn't sure I would ever get to do, and it was put out a book. I wrote this book in 2018. It's called Short Mercy, a novel. I just wrote it like on spec as this fun creative writing exercise. And as I went, I thought this is, if not great by everyone's standard, it's the best thing I'm capable of now. And I've continued to be quite proud of it. And so that I had an opportunity through Pottersfield Press in Lawrencetown, Nova Scotia, to actually publish it and put it in stores and then put it in your hands on your shelves is one of the great honors of my life. And to those of you who have been supportive thus far, I just want to say, oh my God, thank you so much. So for the folks who haven't yet had an opportunity to take a look at Short Mercy, I figured with a few days left of holiday shopping, maybe I could entice you to give this as a gift or to maybe pick it up for your own entertainment over your holiday break. I thought I would read the first chapter. There's 40 chapters in this book, and as you can see, it's not incredibly long, so I think it's palatable in a vacation kind of sense. 40 chapters means the chapters aren't very long, and so I thought I would give you a little sample by beginning with chapter 1. Once again, Short Mercy, a novel, available on all your local shelves, also on the website that we don't need to mention the name of. Chapter 1. Robbing a used bookstore didn't make sense. Except it did, and that's why it happened. Still, there was no precedent. Putting aside that major branches of banks store upwards of $200,000 in cash, they also tend to be accessible from main roads within industrial strips along the straightest paths to highways. Easy getaways from a bank are really not so tricky. Liquor stores are similar in that proximity makes them a target for robbery. Jewelry stores less so than they once were. This is partly why Kay and Peoples and the like flood entire floors of shopping malls. They'll never be held up if the getaway path guides you past 3 jeans outlets and a frozen yogurt stand, and then requires the patience of a gummy traffic circle. Statistically, convenience stores and service stations are robbed more often than any other private business because of petty theft and shoplifting, and also because they're quick and dirty. Knowing this, Jim Short of the bookstore A Word With You struggled to explain why the crook would enter his business rather than the fantastic video directly across the street. He was not one to wish his own misfortune on others typically, but Jim had sent the convenience store enough business over the years that he felt it could warrant a momentary bitterness at the end of his difficult day. A Word With You only took cash, which was likely part of the problem. The fees to process Visa and Interac were unfeasible for a business of such small average transaction. In order not to lose money, he'd have to charge a premium on purchases below $5, and it irked him to imagine involving some corporate third party over a ratty Grisham. So his store didn't take plastic. When irregulars would ask, "Do you take debit?" Jim would say no, but there's a machine in the fantastic video, and he'd point across the street. About 80% of the time, he'd maintain the sale, and the customer would return moments later with a 20 for which he could make change, and a Coke or some chips or something in hand. They almost always bought a concession they otherwise wouldn't have, for which Jim claimed personal credit. It was a no-lose arrangement until a rainy Saturday evening when, as Jim explained to the police, A Word With You was robbed by a man in a black mask about an hour after a single large sale had left his till flush with 53 crisp $20 bills. It was part of his routine to make his deposit along the walk home after closing. The envelope was never so fat, and Jim had already started to feel anxious about having to carry it even just a few blocks. He was only slight, and he knew he couldn't defend himself against an aggressor. He might have called Barry Henniger from up the road to meet him for the walk, just in case anyone unsavory should come along. The irony of Jim's caution was that no one unsavory ever did come along until the night he'd yet to make that cautionary phone call. Heathering was a safe town, or so he believed. But a town is rarely all it appears to be, as Jim was learning. The store was a haven to fans of used books and a disaster to the rest. One had to watch their feet as they perused. The chalky filth on overhanging box tops would smear whiteness on people's coats. The whole place, naturally, had a smell of old paper. The dry whiff of pressure-sealed dust and mold and gone-by days and blissful escapism were all contained so densely. A Word with You was only so big, after all, and book donations came in at a much higher rate than they sold, and so the shelves lining each wall had remained stuffed for decades, while the alphabetically adjacent overstock was left in stacks on the floor until a spot of the proper size became vacant. That was the puzzle Jim enjoyed most. If a Pollinick on the shelf sells, it opens up a spot for another Pollinick to come up from the floor, and if there are no other Pollinicks in stock, another P author gets moved up, but it's got to be a book in the 200-page range, which rules out Pattersons and Picolts and Pynchons, and maybe there's a Pratchett that would fit perfectly, but Pratchetts are kept in fantasy, not fiction. It was a specific equation, and one only Jim wholly understood. That's part of what made the store special. It was only welcoming to those who could handle a considerable amount of controlled chaos. As chaos controller, Jim could blame no one but himself for the robbery, as typically the store would have been closed by 5 on a Saturday. "I can't blame anyone but myself," said Jim to the officer he knew better as Todd, the Abelsons' eldest son. Typically, the store would have been closed by 5 on a Saturday, but I sometimes keep it open late if I've nowhere else to be. It's not costing me to staff just to keep the lights on. "You shouldn't blame yourself, Jim," said Officer Todd. "These things happen. It's not the victim's fault. It'd be like if I stomped on your foot and blamed you for having a foot." "Maybe, but I should know better than to work alone at night on such a quiet street." Officer Todd stood taller than Jim, almost too tall for A Word with You's nether-time low ceilings. He crouched as he wrote his little observations in the sort of top-bound leather notebook all great detectives use. Jim couldn't imagine what Officer Todd might have observed. There were no signs of forced entry, no indications in Jim he'd been harmed, simply 53 missing $20 bills from the register. With the evidence in front of them, Jim couldn't imagine what Officer Todd could possibly have to write down, besides the letters W and J. And that's chapter 1. Thank you again for the support. The book looks like this if you're looking for it on shelves. I hope you have a really merry and safe Christmas. See you around.